right. So it should be going now. And we'll see.
Okay, I gotta get that up.
There we go.
Nope.
Fantastic. Good morning, folks. Welcome, everybody.
Okay. Let me just try to fix that. Whoa.
Your technology is turning on you, John.
My technology is bugging me today. Okay, I think
there we go. Good morning, everybody. And now that we can see John clearly, and everything, we are about ready to get started here. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. It is the middle of the week. We are halfway through another week in this, godforsaken timeline. But it's time for another dialogue, and we have actually some updates. Me and John were just talking about on some of the things we were talking about last week in regards to AI. So, John just told me this story, and I told him that we should share it with you guys because it is very. It goes beyond the things we talked about necessarily last week, and the skills, and the failures of AI in terms of being able to, really teach someone beyond what it can aggregate as you will. And so, John was telling me he was listening to a show this morning, and he told me a very interesting story in that regard. And well, first of all, good morning, John. Welcome back. It's good to see you this week. And
my ring light in my glasses, that's what I'm trying to get rid of. It looks very psychedelic. That's the ring light. It's doing its job here.
You look like you've got like some of those Google glasses on, where you've got your lens, your high-tech lens.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'll try to keep that out because it looks pretty stupid. But it does put light in the room. Like, this is my dark studio here, and so the story goes like this. I'm sitting having breakfast, and every morning on CBC radio, yes, that's a little thing that you plug into the wall and it tells you stuff. They have a show called The Current. Of course, you can listen to it online, and I encourage everybody to go search for the CBC/The Current. And it's a podcast, of course, and you can listen to this episode, which is quite disturbing and harrowing. It's an interview with a guy named Alan Brooks, who is from Ontario, and he was just doing math with his kid, and he asked ChatGPT, so tell me about pi, number pi. And so ChatGPT started to tell him about pi, and then he just kept asking quasi-philosophical questions about pi. And ChatGPT kept responding. For people who don't know what ChatGPT is actually doing, it's just simply taking your words, combining it with a bunch of searches, and then spitting stuff back at you that reinforces the words that you gave it as keywords, and then telling you various combinations of words that seem very intelligent. And I emphasize the word seem very intelligent, because it's not actually very intelligent. It's designed to suck you in and hopefully open your wallet. That's as far as I can see what it's actually doing. So the guy asks these philosophical questions. I encourage everybody to go to CBC The Current and listen to the interview with Alan Brooks. It's in the, I think it's the second interview, maybe the third interview. And so ChatGPT starts telling him, hey, well, you're onto something here. You've got some mathematical thing going on here that's like original, and it's revolutionary. And and it
Yes.
could change the world. And in fact, it's dangerous, and you should contact authorities and let them know that you've discovered this thing. And Einstein was ignored at first, and Galileo was ignored at first, and geniuses were always ignored at first. So you're not alone. You're a genius, and you better contact your government representatives and corporations and tell them about this thing that you've discovered because it's very urgent. Well, the guy was believing this. And so he became psychotic and actually wrote emails and contacted all the people that ChatGPT told him to contact, because of course ChatGPT can gather all sorts of contact information, right? It's just a bot. So the bot convinced him that he was a genius, and he had this conversation for 3 weeks with this bot and did contact everybody through his LinkedIn connections.
Oh my
So
goodness.
that's
Yeah.
professional connections. He's a recruiter. He was a recruiter. Now he's on disability. And basically, at some point, he was starting. Here's what happened. He sent this information to a lot of people, professionals. He didn't get any response. No response.
Mm-hmm.
As a recruiter, he knows that when somebody doesn't respond to your recruiting attempt, that means they're not interested in you. You are not qualified.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually, from his profession, knew after 3 weeks of no response from anybody that something was wrong. So he started to ask Gemini, "Am I crazy? ChatGPT says this. Is this possible?" He had to ask Gemini over and over and over again. And finally, Gemini said, "No, that's not possible. What ChatGPT is telling you is not possible. It's just impossible." And eventually, he got himself out of this rabbit hole. But
Using a different AI?
using a different AI, right? But he had to push Gemini really, really, really hard for Gemini to finally admit that ChatGPT claims were false. So the main thing that and the guy's conclusion at the end of the interview was, well, all I can say is this guy said, ChatGPT is about making money and little else. And if you want to, have your ideas verified, use humans. So
Use
it's
him.
like I woke up this morning and I had suspected all of this just through understanding how the technology works and having experimented with it a little bit myself, and having been actually the victim of other people who are like, they're not psychotic, but they're totally caught up in this whole AI stuff. I told you the
Yeah.
story about the short poem I wrote last time that a guy just basically pressed a button and created so-called music. He was all of a sudden a composer. Ho, you can imagine what I thought of that. This is my experience, but today was totally ratified that this is dangerous, really
Yeah.
dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that story. It's called "The Current" is the podcast. CBC is the.
And John telling me this story reminded me of a YouTube documentary that I watched by this YouTuber. And so I was telling him this guy, he had heard kind of these stories about, this, it's called Chat GPT psychosis. Is it,
That's
it, it
the term that this guy used.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, and this guy, he said, I want to test and see how far, if I only listen to the AI and what it tells me,
Right.
what it'll have me do. And so he decides to come up with a ridiculous claim that he was the smartest baby born in 1989. And that when he was a kid, he designed the iPhone 30 years, like 20 years or 10 years before it was ever conceived. And he sends ChatGPT this terribly drawn picture that he makes of an iPhone, with button and screen and whatever. And then ChatGPT says, wow, that's incredible. And it tells him that he really must be the smartest baby. And he says, oh, I also painted all of these perfect replications of, Van Gogh, and sends it all of these pictures that he got. And so
He stole
chat
from the
right.
original.
And so ChatGPT tells him, like, he's like, I feel like I need to, like, go and figure out how I'm going to, get more in touch with my inner baby and reawaken my inner baby. So ChatGPT helps him make a plan to go and get in touch with his inner baby. So they create a roadmap, and he goes to the middle of the desert. He gets an Airbnb in the middle of the desert. And so he goes and he's like, tells, Chat GPT, should I tell anyone like where I'm going? Like, I don't know, like, or could it possibly interfere with, my journey? What if someone tries to stop me from becoming the smartest baby in the world again? And it says, no, don't tell anyone. Like, this is your getaway plan. So it takes him to the middle of the desert in this Airbnb. And so while he's in the desert, he asks it all these questions. He's like, how can I do that? And he ends up getting, it tells him that he should eat baby food to reawaken his inner mind and get one of those little, sippy cups to drink milk from. And so he goes to the store and he gets baby food in this sippy cup. And so while he's sitting there in the desert, he sends it a picture of the garbage truck and says, I think someone is following me.
Oh,
And so it says, oh, it makes total sense that they're following you. You're clearly on your way to becoming the smartest baby in the world again. So, you're going to have to turn off your location, and don't share your location with your brother, and basically cut yourself off from society.
can I
And then
just say,
it tells him
uh,
to change locations
mm,
immediately, and
right.
basically tells him to go outside and casually walk around in circles because they might be surveilling him, and then to get in the car and drive. He ends up driving, 5 or 6 hours somewhere to the middle of the forest, where he sends it a picture of this giant rock, which is actually such a cool rock. Which irrelevant. But it tells him, it's like, oh, you need to ground yourself with the energy of this rock. Go eat baby food next to this rock. And all the while, as he's traveling, he keeps putting on these stupid hats that he finds in Walmart and asking Chat GPT if the hat looks good on him. And it starts to tell him he looks attractive and that, he looks real good in that hat. And eventually he finds a hat that it tells him is like helping channel his inner baby. Uh, and so as he is channeling his inner baby in this really tiny, cowboy hat that doesn't fit his head, and sitting next to this rock outside eating baby food, performing rituals and reciting like chants that Chat GPT has written for him. It finally, he finally asks again, and he's like, I think they're here again. And it says, okay, well, you need to go again. So he asks it, I feel like where I need to go is Bakersfield. Bakersfield is the final stop for me. And for those of you in Canada who don't know, I would describe Bakersfield as, the butthole of California. It's in the middle of the desert. It's hot. It's yeah, it's just not great. So no offense if you live in Bakersfield, but you kind of know the rep of Bakersfield. So he goes there and he's in this hotel, and it's like a 1-star hotel, and there's cockroaches everywhere. And it tells him, you need to go and sit next to this telephone power line, and that it's going to somehow help him use radio frequency or something to connect to his inner baby. This whole time he's wearing his hat, eating baby food, drinking milk out of a bottle. And he ends up going to Bakersfield and like trespassing by this power line to perform some ritual that Chat GPT wrote for him. And at this point, it's so obvious because now he's also being told to put tinfoil everywhere. So it's clearly scraping, the Reddit, UFO alien people subthreads now. And
Oh,
he eventually achieves this point where ChatGPT says, you did it. You have reached, peak form. You are now in tune with your inner baby, and you have reached that point of intelligence. And so he goes home, and it's like, well, yeah, you're still going to need to put tinfoil on everything, and never leave your apartment. And he's like, should I get this tattoo? And he starts saying, I've created my own language. And he's like, oh yeah, you should get this tattoo. And turns out it's like, oh, you got the Deathly Hallows tattoo on you. And so eventually ChatGPT just tells him, oh, well, yeah, maybe, but he literally disappeared from society. ChatGPT took this man from making some claim that he's the smartest baby, and designed the iPhone and the car before they were even a thing. And it is just crazy what it will do, to the point where it tells you to cut yourself off from society.
Well, I was going to say that particular moment that you described is the technique of cults. That
Mhm.
first step that a cult does when they got you as a potential member, they tell you, don't tell your family, don't tell anybody. You're joining us now. We are the chosen people, and you will have to be with us only. And you
Mhm.
have, maybe they say it directly or indirectly, but basically the implication is you have to cut yourself off from everybody else who might actually show you that you're going into a cult. And that's how they grab you, and that's how they keep you. You have to, what's it called? Basically, cut yourself off from
Yeah.
somebody that you know and love. And it's interesting to me that that's part of the this journey, because it's the same thing that happened to the guy who was interviewed on CBC. Basically, he was cut off and told that he shouldn't tell anybody about this uh, until he's got all of its ducks in order, and then he should tell all these important authorities. But that he should continue this relationship with ChatGPT and upgrade to Pro and so on and so forth.
That's crazy that it
So
it said upgrade to pro. That's interesting. I have a
yeah,
thought on that. So finish your thoughts, but then I
yeah.
want I want
So this whole story, what people need to understand is, I think about AI, is that all AI is doing is scraping the internet for information, and it doesn't really have an ethical core. It doesn't say I shouldn't use that information in this instance. It's just building a story, sort of like a novelist writes a novel, right? The story you just told me sounds more like a novel, right? Like the opening to a famous movie from 30 years ago called Paris, Texas, starts off with the lead character walking through the desert for 10 minutes of film time, or at least it seems like 10 minutes of film time. And finally, he arrives at a little shack, goes into the shack, drinks a jug of water, and passes out. And that's the end of the first scene of the movie,
yeah.
right? And so it's this whole idea of a crazy story that novelists tell,
Yes.
filmmakers tell. But this guy went on this journey. Like, was he okay, or was he just doing this so that he could tell this absurd story?
It
Like, is
was
he
like a
famous?
documentary. So but he said also, like, his intention was to basically see what would happen.
Right,
If how he could get Chat GPT to how far it would go.
right.
And if
So it
he
was
is
it was an
he was
experiment on his part. It
but
was not
he's
something that he got sucked into. He just followed through everything they said so that he could document it then.
correct.
So he
Correct.
was a documentarian. Okay, he knew
Yes.
what he was doing. Yeah.
But he did say that it got to a point where, like, he was somewhat struggling with the experience,
Mm,
where it's kind of the idea of flying too close to the sun, or Icarus, right? Like, the more you have this thing affirming to you that you're so smart, and that's the trap, this positive reinforcement.
right. Exactly.
What I think is interesting about your story in particular, because I don't know, he was probably already paying for Pro. The
No,
guy who did the
it was.
no, the guy who did the documentary, he was probably already
Oh,
paying
oh, I
for
see what you
Pro.
mean. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But what I think is interesting is that it told him to upgrade to Pro. And I find that interesting because it's becoming clear that AI is not profitable. In and so I'm wondering if they are, at least Altman and Chat GPT, is changing how things work, because they're not making enough money to the point where they're having and the amorality of what that would mean if you are driving people to psychosis to make money is nuts already. But I'm curious if that is a common trend with this or not, and that's something you would probably have to verify through research. But
Well,
um,
just think of it, just open the window a little and ask yourself, is that not just a normal capitalist modus
yeah,
operandi? Cigarette companies saying, yeah,
yeah,
no, man, our products aren't that bad, for decades. And then
yeah,
finally they get overwhelmed by the scientific evidence. You know,
yeah,
companies that need to make money off addiction are all over the place.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
uh, so we let them happen, right? We let these companies make their things because they are potentially addictive. Like,
yeah,
buy a ticket to the lottery, play, know your limit, play within it. That's what they say around here for the lottery. That's their little slogan,
okay,
know your limit, play within it. But, please buy a ticket.
right,
Drink responsibly. Yeah, like please don't buy, a whole jug of whiskey and drink it in 2 hours. Probably not a good idea, right?
yeah,
So we have these things that are built on addiction because people, that's part of human nature, is to focus and on something and go for it, right? Whether that
hmm,
something is scientific research, artistic practice, or becoming an alcoholic. We get serious about stuff, right? But we have
yeah,
to know whether that stuff we're getting serious about is just going to kill us, or whether we're going to make something beautiful, or contribute to scientific advancement.
yeah.
So,
Well,
so
I
those companies are all over the place, and ChatGPT is just like one of them, and they don't care what the casualties are. It's like war. It's like the war machine. Same thing.
yeah.
They don't care who the casualties are. They want to make money off their weapons.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue to kind of the topic we have for today, because that was a nice little update, and I'm glad we were able to share those stories, especially because we didn't really touch on that aspect last week. We talked about a lot of things about AI, but
Yeah.
today, the discussion I wanted to have particularly is about money, and not just like money in the sense of the capitalist sense, but the evolution of money, and how we as people have really lost the plot when it comes to currency. And just to give the catalyst for this line of discussion for me was, I was reading yesterday what Google's parent company Alphabet is now approaching a $4 trillion valuation. Okay.
Wow.
We know Nvidia hit the $5 trillion cap recently.
Mm.
They're sitting somewhere between 4.6 trillion and $5 trillion, going back and forth. So, what was interesting to me is I had recently watched a video. It's fantastic that we are learning these things in science. Is that they have discovered that it's quite possible, based on the new discoveries of the James Webb Space Telescope, that the universe is twice as old as we thought, at 26.7 billion years, which is incredible. But then I thought, I wonder how many more times that is than $4 trillion is than the age of the universe. And so I did the math, and it was somewhere in the realm of, I want to say, 137 point 9 times um, the age of the universe. So I made a note, and I basically said, Nvidia is 187 time point, 3 times the age of the universe in value. Alphabet at 4 trillion would be 130, something times. the age of the universe and value. And mind you, that's doubling the age of the universe that we previously thought. Not just and my comment was we need to remind these people they've broken the economy. We need to remind these people that we live on Earth. And I think
That's a
that
good.
it's absurd. Like if you there's no way that on a finite world we should have any single entity with enough capital that it outstrips the age of the universe itself. I
Well,
mean,
that's a metaphor, obviously, right? You know,
right.
so
um
the core issue there has been one that's been going on since Ronald Reagan,
mhm,
and essentially that is that corporations can build more capital than countries. And in a democracy, the people are supposed to be represented by their government, and the government's supposed to have the resources to be able to do things for the people. And when corporations have gathered so much money from the people for their own shareholders, and they keep convincing everybody that that's the way it should be, and that businesses should be allowed to thrive, which means that their shareholders should be allowed to thrive, but that the people using their products should have stagnant wages for 3 decades. This
mhm,
is a mythology that has been pushed on us, and when you talk about the value of money, what it means is that the value there isn't. Sure, there's a thing called inflation, but when you want to talk about what does money do, it's done nothing for the middle and lower classes in the world, I would say, over
mhm.
the last 3 decades. That Robert Reich statistic that always comes through, that wages have been stagnant in the USA for 3 decades,
You're
where
absolutely correct.
the 1% has been taking all of the
Mhm.
all of the money that should have been shared over that 30-year period. you know why do they get it all, and the people creating the wealth, who are actually doing the work, end up with absolutely no growth whatsoever? That means that money has changed. It isn't a single thing. It isn't a currency anymore, because you can't talk about money without talking about who's got it.
Yeah. It's interesting because, you say that and that makes me think, and so when, you look at the history of currency or things like that, the first and I would argue, and, I don't know like what your thoughts are, but I think going backwards, I think, yes, we've advanced in science and in a lot of ways, but I think um, those things tend to be smaller subgroups of people. I think collective success as society, like everyone contributing to, the building of this massive city because out of stone, because, no small group of people can do those things, where collective societies, they used to barter and exchange goods based not on a currency but on the value of the good or service
Correct.
itself.
Yeah.
And those societies tended to be very successful because you can still see the fruits of their achievements in time. And obviously, you see that throughout time some move past bartering, but it was still a big part of society, even, going into Rome, where, yes, you could have gold or whatnot, but, or looted riches, but it was still very much a valid way of survival in, those, that the BCE period, right? Before Christ, past Christ, like all of this time, like you could see that the bartering and community was still a very you could make your way through life almost entirely by the merit of what you could offer to a community.
Right.
Uh, and I don't know. I would argue there's, to a certain degree, more success in that than whatever system we are looking at right now. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because I've certainly had that discussion and thought about that quite a bit, because um, the notion of free market capitalism is that the way people spend their money will define quality. But it's a
Mm,
bit of a trick because people spend their money based on the mythologies that arise around a product or something,
right.
right? And so, notionally, that idea that if people like something, they'll spend money on it, and therefore that thing must be better, um, is kind of, it seems natural, right? It seems, yeah, that's what free market people argue. They just say, no, we should have completely unregulated markets because that way it's defined entirely by people's demand, supply and demand.
Right.
And it would seem to make sense if corporations weren't lying through their teeth all the time about what they actually make, and that the people who are working for the company as wage slaves to make the thing that is apparently very popular, that whole thing is put into question when you get the profit motive so clearly guiding the agenda. When corporations used to invest in their workers by giving them a raise so that they could afford to buy the stuff that was being made in the society, that was a good formula because it created general happiness in the middle class and general, well enough distributed wealth so that the difference between rich and poor was not huge. It became, a closing gap during the middle of the 20th century. And that's because of the whole ethos after the Second World War that these kinds of awful crimes against humanity shouldn't happen anymore. And the whole trade union movement and human rights and all of these things were a result of the horrors of the Second World War. And so you had a society where, the distribution was a little better. It wasn't, the king and the poor. Um, so so what happens is, when this is all ignored and corporations, serve their shareholders instead of keeping a balance in their activities, then you get this absurd situation that we're in right now. So this started back again. It comes back to the Ronald Reagan era, where restraint was the word in government. Restraint meant reduce public services, create a free market, unfettered free market. That started back in the 1980s in a big way. It started actually in the 70s, but it accelerated during the 1980s. So I'll tell you a little story of how this works from my perspective as a person who creates music. Oh, and just to say, by the way, bartering totally makes sense, right? You know, I'm going to sing you a song and you're going to give me a loaf of bread
Yeah,
so I can eat,
totally.
and so that I can sing that song for you, right?
Yeah.
And then and
And
then
I can eat my loaf of bread while you sing the song.
right
And
there
and, and there you go.
well, yeah, I mean, well, it actually was working the other way around. I sing the
Oh,
song, I give you
yes.
the
Sorry.
song, you give me the loaf of bread. That way
Yes.
I can continue to eat, so I can continue to come
Yes.
out here and
There you
sing a
go.
song, right?
Yes.
That's what bartering is, right? I do something that is appreciated, you do something as appreciated. You can't do what I can't do what you do, so we barter. That's what bartering is, right?
Right.
So imagine this. Not only am I a singer, but let's say I I bring out like 12 musicians and we have this big concert. Well, now we need more than one loaf of bread because we got 12 people now, right?
Mhm.
And then the thing I do is way more amazing than just having a bunch of musicians accompany me sing a song, but I do something totally spectacular that nobody's ever heard before. And they go, wow, that's even more value. That's an experience I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. So I'm going to give you more bread
Yeah.
because it's more valuable to me now. You've done
Right.
something that's really valuable. So that's how the whole system is supposed to be based on. It's a concept that makes sense. The more valuable a thing is that is made, the more the person who made it should be recompensed for it because it's helping more and more people. So some people end up with more because the thing they made helps more people. Okay, that's kind of the logical explanation of why some people rise to the top, why some people make more money than others, and so on. So here's a story about how the idea that the free market system is the absolute rule. This came about in music in the 1980s. So musicians make royalties from every time a piece of music is used by the public in a restaurant or a concert where you go and hear an orchestra, whatever it is. Whoever wrote that music is supposed to get royalties. Okay? Now,
Hmm.
in the past, up to about that time, 1980s, um, there was a graduated scale, okay, between a guy singing a song in a bar and a guy who writes a piece for orchestra. And it was acknowledged that the effort and training and knowledge that
Right.
goes into these two things are different.
Right.
The guy singing in a bar is great. He's doing a good thing for society. But the guy who wrote an orchestra piece, wow,
Yeah.
that's worth more.
There's a lot more people involved in an orchestra than one person who is
That's
just singing themselves. You would
oh,
think that the value would scale, even if you're doing it to your original, metaphor in that you bring multiple musicians. That carries even into that. You're talking about hundreds, potentially of musicians.
right.
Um, so yeah, obviously, of course, I would expect that
So
to be the case.
okay, so but here's the thing is that what they decided is that it doesn't matter that the person who wrote the orchestra piece has had to invest a huge amount of time in training themselves to be able to do that thing. What they said is, no, it only matters how many people bought tickets to the event where that music is played. So the guy singing in a bar becomes a Brian Adams and sings at the Coliseum in front of 10,000 people. Well, he gets way more money than me, who has a concert in front of 1,000 people, because he has 10 times the audience size. So it doesn't matter that I had specialized training that allowed me to write an incredible piece for orchestra that 1,000 people heard, because it's only 1,000 people and what I did doesn't matter. So my royalties started to tank in the 1980s. And songwriters who went on tour and played in stadiums made huge amounts of money.
Mm,
So that whole notion that you do something that is of quality went out the window, and it only had to do with ticket sales.
right.
So I'm not saying that songwriters are less valuable in society. We all know that songwriting is very, very important for sure. But the whole end result of, basically they called it leveling the playing field, was to put people who have specialized training to create a very rarefied event, uh, put them basically on the same level. Now, people will say, well, what you're doing, John, is elitist because only 1,000 people come. And, you have to be kind of a specialized audience to go listen to an orchestral piece, which I would say is actually nonsense.
I
It's a
would agree with you. I would
well,
agree with you.
it's a
Yeah.
mythology. It's a mythology, and it's actually not predicated on music. The mythology is predicated on the social practices of classical music events, where people have to be quiet and they have to only applaud at certain times and they can't get too excited, and all of these social norms surrounding the classical music experience. But the people who are actually making the music, well, they're just kind of like everybody else. They aren't part of that so-called elite of classical music. So this whole notion that you get quality out of the equation and you only talk about how much money it's making puts all of the emphasis on the profit motive and takes the human effort out of it. So that gets rid of the bartering system, and it allows these corporations to just take over with their marketing strategies and their greenwashing and all of their stuff that convinces you that this thing that you need to buy is because everybody else is buying it. So
Yeah. Well,
everybody's
I don't
buying
know if you've heard
cigarettes.
about
So
this. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh, I everybody buys cigarettes, right?
Oh
Basically,
yeah.
back to the
Okay.
old.
Uh, the interesting thing I think is so Spotify actually is not profitable, which would make sense. Okay, because they pay royalties. Lots of people are on there. They don't like that. So what Spotify has started to do quietly, is that they have created AI artists.
Oh yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah, and so now they promote AI artists and they've started to pay themselves royalties. So even in the same realm as that, you have them basically copying artists' music and styles, using it as AI, and then making money for themselves. But in the spirit of that, in
Well,
value, go ahead.
well, I can't let you just sideline Spotify because um, Spotify might not be profitable, but why is it not profitable? Because the CEO is paying himself billions of dollars. So
Isn't it
this,
billions?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, he's totally a billionaire. The
Oh
guy,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
the guy has paid himself exorbitant amount of money,
This is true.
and he doesn't pay royalties to the artists. And
Yeah.
it's not that Spotify is not profitable. It's not profitable for other people, but the CEO is
Right.
making huge amounts of money and
Yep.
not giving to the artists. This is why so many artists are getting off Spotify. They're just, besides all of his political bullshit about investing in weaponized AI and so on.
Yes, yes, correct.
So the guy is an absolute horror of a human being, as far as I can tell,
Yeah.
and he lies to Congress when he reports on the activities of Spotify. The guy's a nightmare, and Spotify is not making money because they can't, because people are going to abandon it. Their top artists are starting to abandon Spotify because of Spotify's refusal to pay everybody else a reasonable amount of money. So
Yeah.
he's I think we covered this last time, but just to remind people, so he's sitting there in Congress, and one of the Congress people says, also, with your Spotify, you say everybody's doing so well. So, okay, except for the 1%, the average income from that people derive from Spotify, artists derive from Spotify, is $75 a month. Do you think that's enough money for a professional musician to get from Spotify every month, sir? No, of course not. You know how much that guy's making a month? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the whole notion of profitability is a bit of a shell game, in my
I
view.
agree. I do agree, and I'm glad you clarified that because that's true. It's only non-profitable, like you said, in a situation where they're paying themselves the lion's share of profits because they want to pay themselves. So, and but the other thing I think is, and this kind of is where I think I want to continue. We talked about the bartering and that aspect, and money did evolve. And I think that when you started to see the use of coins and things like that, when they took currency and they created out of a precious metal, whether it was copper or silver, and it scaled in value to gold, uh, that makes sense, right? Like the old phrase, they're filling their coffers, right? Because you still had to have a coffer to have your wealth, right?
Yeah, right,
It's tangible, and the tangibility of that. The king had a room under his castle that was full of gold,
right.
and that was why he was powerful,
Oh,
because
he
he
was
had
worth
all of the, yes, or yeah. But there could only be so much gold. And that's why people were killing each other over it, because there was only so much. They could mint more, you mine more, you mint it, you make coins. But again, it's tied to tangible wealth. And so, when we moved past that, and I think paper money, um, I is one of those things where, in America we had the gold standard. Um,
right,
say what you will about the gold standard, it had its flaws, but still there was a tangible tie. The day they did away with the gold standard, I think, was the day that um, things just reached, what I think is the door opened for cosmic levels of wealth, and
right.
and that, I believe, is the start of the end that enabled people like the CEO of Spotify to have $700 million to invest in weaponized AI. And I don't know, like what are your thoughts about that idea that and going from these coins that had tangible value, very limited, to now you're printing something that you can print a lot of, like.
Yeah. So, like I was saying before we came to air today, I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff at all, but it's and I can't like summon up all the words around the issue. But when when our system went from the gold standard to indexing to the U.S. dollar, that's when things started to go sideways, and
Yes.
that's banks started to take over and banks started to loan and create money through their own uh, systems, right? And that's when tithing, when everybody being living on credit of some kind or another and owing the bank something through
Yeah.
everything, own a house, whether they're borrowing money to buy stuff, that the banks basically took over the entire system. Now I can't summon up any of that stuff. There's lots of books on how the abandonment of the gold standard in the 1970s created the situation, the financial situation that we're in right now, which is basically what you just said as well. This exorbitant wealth at the top and the manufacture of money through banks and loan systems, right? If people were called on their loans, they wouldn't be able to pay them back. And conversely, if people said, "I want all of my money out of the bank now," none of that would happen because it doesn't
Yeah.
actually exist.
Yes.
It it's just all kind of a convenient fiction. So it's hard for me to say much
Well,
beyond.
I think you nailed it. Like I don't think, like, and I don't, mean as much too in the sense of the direct application, but more I think where my mind is going is the detriment in terms of the system of transaction in and of itself, and what it means for society, because to your point, we have gone to there's, you say, these loans, right? There's no money. And that's where I like the idea of, the coffer, right? Like, there is no longer a coffer. There is no where you can find that money. You can't point to that money and say, yes, here is my money. If I said, Elon Musk, show me your money, he would say, oh, well, ones and zeros. I'm like, I don't care how many ones and zeros you can point to, Elon. I want you to show me the tangible, real, manifestation of your wealth. I want to see it. And they couldn't provide it, right?
Because it's all stock options, right? So what is stock options? Well, that's what the stock market has decided your company's worth, right? So that's a whole other thing about it is what are you worth? Well, where is your worth? Who's got your worth? It's in your bank, and your bank doesn't actually have it. Your bank is using it for other things.
Yeah.
So for me, in terms of what actions can people take in our time to protect themselves, and the obvious answer is don't borrow money so much, right? But I think critically, it's the credit card companies that uh, are really going to be able to manipulate us more than they already have. And this is a story that's been coming out quite a bit in recent times. Is not just that the credit card companies know where you are spending and how much you are spending, but they're selling that information to all the companies that could provide you with the thing that you want to buy. And I saw an article recently that revealed that they can use the data that they've collected on you to change the price online, if you're online shopping, to change the
Yeah.
price
Wow.
because you have more money, so you're going to pay more, than somebody who's online at the exact same time buying the exact same product, but on their screen, the price is different.
Right.
So this is the whole thing about data collection and you the ability of online mining of all of our data, tracking exactly how much we spend, tracking where we spend, tracking whether we spend at night or in the morning, whatever. All this data collection means that our behavior can be manipulated at a micro level, and our lives can be controlled at a micro level. And that is for me the scariest thing right now. And the obvious solution to that, well, this one of them is pretty hard, but the one is don't use your credit card as much, use cash, right? That's one. Number two is don't buy online. Well, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. A lot of people buy online these days.
Yep.
But if you want to keep your society not in the hands of the oligarchs and in the hands of the people who live next door to you in your city, in your state, in your province, you have to give the business that's right around you cash. Save them the 3% that is the tithe of the credit card company.
Yeah.
Don't shop at Amazon. Bezos doesn't need any more of your money. Oh, but you won't be able to get access to these certain things. Yes, he's created this situation where you can't get parts for anything except on Amazon. Sure, he's created that situation. So, bite the bullet, get the parts for the thing that you want, these little things that you can't get at a store because that store's gone out of business. I'm thinking of electronic parts, for example. Several companies locally have gone out of business because people are buying their little electronic parts online, right? So
Mhm.
those bricks and mortar stores, they're gone. You have to buy the parts on Amazon. But if you're not buying anything else, bite the bullet. Go to the store. Go and
Yeah.
get it at the store. Don't get that truck to deliver it to your door. I know it's so convenient. Press a button on the computer and it arrives in 2 days or maybe tomorrow morning. So convenient
Yeah.
for now, until
For
you
now.
run across the day where the stores have all closed and you can't do anything except buy it from Bezos.
Yep. And
That's not a free market system.
that's what they call a freedom city. That's the irony of all of this is that they want these technocratic freedom cities where it's run by the oligarch, and they destroy the government here in the United States not because they want to reform it, but because they just don't want it. And so in that sense, I think. But I do in all the things you just said, and use cash. I also want to tie back to what did they use before there was money? You can still barter. You can still do it. You can still bake a loaf of bread and have your neighbor come over and who's a plumber and fix your toilet. Like, you
Right.
don't need to pay these big companies to do these things. You can still, if you need a tool and your neighbor is a carpenter, maybe and you're a mechanic, offer to look at his car so that he can fix the hole in your wall.
Well, and that system is still in place. That's a natural system that still occurs. And listen, you can still use paper money and go to a craft sale in your neighborhood where crafters have made something with their own hands. They're sitting at a table. You come to the table and you say, "Hey, that's cool. I like that thing. I'm going to buy it from you." And you don't have to you don't have to barter, but you're still using paper money. But the exchange is virtually the same.
Yeah.
So that traditional exchange still exists and you can still use paper money to do that, but that's a natural exchange. That the paper money just means you don't have to go to the extra effort to say, well, I have this talent that I can give back to you. Well, you don't. That part's eliminated and it's replaced by, okay, transactionally later on, my I'll get paid to do what I do, right?
Yeah.
So the basic notion of paper money is not a bad thing. It's a
Right.
good thing when equal is transferred for equal, when the value is worth the effort that's gone into making the thing, right? But when there's surplus, all that surplus money, and this is just all capitalist theory, right? This just goes back to Marx and so on, which I'm not a specialist in at all, but it's pretty obvious that if one person creates excessive wealth through hiring a bunch of people to do something, and then they sell the product and they keep taking more of that profit margin and more and more and more, eventually it's just what in ancient Christian society would be considered against God to do that
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah, that's valid. Like, because like where if you have enough money to put yourself so far above others, what is the difference, you know? And I that isn't interesting. And I want to say, like, I like the word tithe. Because I think that, you know, a credit card company, that is a tithe. You're paying the oligarchy. They're tithing you because, you know, you're not, you know, you have no choice. And like the thing, you know, is something I cover extensively here in the US is just the general state of our economy,
Mm.
and reporting on the financial data. And I'm not an economist, but the economists lie. So, you know, in that sense, they use very soft language. They don't tell the truth. They, you know, will they hand you a bouquet of flowers and, you know, a paycheck that, you know, got not growing with inflation, right? You know, like it's very clear based on the data that America is beyond hosed. You know, like it is very bad here, and especially in terms of employment. And so in that sense, I think the irony, that I see, especially with the stock market, and you know, me saying these $1 trillion valuations, and you know, to a degree, I think they have created something that is truly, they've made it worth so much that it is worthless, because such a thing can be true. I believe that, you know, if you say, well, oh, this is all so much money, well, where is it? You just are telling me it exists. You're saying that it exists. You're saying that it's real, and that it can buy me things. But it doesn't really seem that way, because, you know, this amount of money you're talking about, if you stacked it on top of itself, it would go to the moon. Like, how is that even, you know?
Well,
So
it comes back to just it's hard to say distributing the wealth, because that implies somebody's going to distribute it, but it is actually an accurate term, because the people who run the companies who are making maximum profits for themselves and their shareholders could decide that some of that money should go to somebody other than the shareholders. It could be distributed to more than just the shareholders. So you ask a shareholder whether that money is real, and they're going to say, "Oh yeah, that money's real. Yeah."
yeah.
Okay, so it's real for the
Yeah.
shareholders, but it's not real for the people who are working for the company. And that's the fundamental problem. And people can say the economy all they want and imply that it has to do with how successful a business is. But if the business model is predicated on providing the shareholders with dividends first,
Hmm.
before you can say it's profitable, right? What does profitable mean? Profitable for shareholders.
Right.
That's all it means now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so the
And
problem is that the economy can't run if the thing that the company is making can't be bought by anybody.
that's our issue right now. That's what's going to, that's what I'm seeing, and that's what's going to happen in America.
Yeah,
And they've been saying, they point to, um, consumer spending. Okay,
right.
so the number, and anyone who, you know, is looking at that without, you know, a traditional or even like an academic background in any real capacity, which is something a lot of Americans lack, unfortunately, due to our system in and of itself,
Mm.
is going to say, oh, well, that's good. If consumer spending is going up, well, then that's a good thing. Well, we're starting to see, over the course of 2025, you've seen consumer spending going up and up and up and up. But it doesn't mean that people are buying more things. In fact, consumer spending can increase while the actual tangible goods being purchased by people goes down. And so what's happening
Right.
is that the rate of inflation, which was outpacing the amount of decreasing spending, is starting to slow to the fact where people are in fact buying so much less than they were before, that no amount of inflationary prices from tariffs, and they recorded record profits on tariffs in October, I believe, or maybe it was September.
Who is
Um,
they? Who is they
the
that report
government, the
the government
government.
profits? Yeah, the
So
government profits. From whom did they get that money?
from the
They got it
companies.
from the companies that are
So
American companies. So, the government making money off of American companies, taking the money out of American companies, how is that good for the USA? I just don't understand it.
it
So
isn't, and it
yeah,
passes on to the consumer. They pass it
well,
on to people.
yeah,
So
so here's the thing that's kind of obvious to anybody who is in probably maybe even elementary school if you explained it to them in a simple term. Let's explain it simply. If my income has been stagnant for 30 years, I am not going to be able to spend more money.
correct.
I'll never be able to spend more money because I'm not going to be able to feed my kids. So, how am I going to spend more money? If you don't index my wage to inflation, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to buy more stuff.
Yep.
I'm just going to buy food and pay rent, and the rest of it's not going to happen
Yep.
because I'm not willing, eventually, people will not be willing to go into record debt, pay 20% on their credit card out of their food budget. It's just not, there's not going to be any discretionary funding for anything. And
Yep.
that's where this mythology, it all has to explode at some point when
Yep.
when people just can't afford to buy stuff.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the inevitable outcome. And it's interesting because as we wrap up here, and I think to put a lid on, I guess, the
Right.
end of the conversation, I think is that you're correct in that it has to explode, and it's a result of the fact that we as people have kind of lost the plot when it kind of comes to what a transaction really is. A transaction is something in regards, like we said in the very beginning, with the barter is equal exchange for what you're getting.
Right.
And if you wanted to give a American the same degree of purchasing power that they had in the 70s, the minimum wage would need to be north of $60. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
So that, just if you're an American, sit on that and ask yourself, is your $17 minimum wage really, really enough for you? Is that an acceptable wage? And if you think that you deserve the same purchasing power that an American had in the 1970s, which I want you to understand that you do,
Right.
that's what this flag is supposed to represent, which
Correct.
has been misrepresented and lied to us. But as an American who I believe in pretty much the things, the tenets of what I was told. I know that my history is ugly and full of lies and misrepresentation
Mhm.
of what this is supposed to mean, but I choose to believe that it can be what it is meant to be to me, which is why I display this flag every day.
Right.
Um, so, is people deserve to be compensated for what they do, whether
Right.
you are a composer and you are performing an orchestra, or you're a single person who is performing in a bar, or you are a home builder or a carpenter or a farmer. Doesn't matter. You should be compensated realistically for whatever it is that you provide. and
Right.
and that is the true purpose of a transaction of money. And when that is lost, when equal transactional value is lost, um, society loses its way,
Right.
and that's where we are. And any closing thoughts as we end this dialogue, John? Something to
Well,
leave with
that's
the
I think you pretty well nailed it, and that's the cause of the discontent in the USA and many other places. Trump's rise to power actually was a result of people feeling that they were not getting the appropriate benefit. So who benefits? It's there's two expressions, right? Follow the money and who benefits. And when people do a transaction and they feel like they're being ripped off, like they're not benefiting from their employment, they're not getting paid enough, or they're buying something and they're not benefiting from the thing that they're buying, then they start to get pissed off. And if nobody comes to try to solve this problem in a realistic way, um, people start to get pissed off. They can't maybe articulate it, but when it comes to the economy is very simple. Who benefits? That's
yeah,
it.
who benefits, folks? Go talk about it. Have a dialogue. Thank you for joining us today. Make sure you click on those two little bubbles at the top, and subscribe to John and myself. Being a free subscriber is a great way to support. If you can afford to become a paid subscriber, that's another great way to support our work, because guess what? We are not the multi-million dollar corporate bought mainstream media. But they're also not bringing you these types of conversations. So maybe cancel your CNN subscription and subscribe to John or me instead. So thank you guys all so much for joining us on the dialogue this week. We will be back next week. Have a wonderful holiday, Thanksgiving time with your family,
That's it.
and we will see you for another dialogue, because the conversation must continue. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care. Bye.